3 years of war with Russia and Ukraine continues its push for NATO membership. This time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he is ready to step down if it meant Kyiv would be admitted to the military alliance. He has been calling for Ukraine to be given NATO membership as a part of any deal to end the war. But the US-led alliance has been reluctant to commit now more than ever.
Якщо мир для України, якщо вам дуже потрібно, щоб я залишив свій пост, я готовий. Друга історія, можу поміняти це на НАТО. Якщо є такі умови, одразу.
Zelensky and US President Donald Trump have engaged in a war of words since American and Russian officials met last week in Saudi Arabia for the first high-level talks in 3 years. After the talks, Trump repeated Russia's narrative that Ukraine started the war, prompting reaction from Zelensky, who said that the US president was living in a disinformation space governed by Moscow. Trump did not let go of the comment and called Zelensky a dictator without election. And reacting to the comment, Zelensky said he was not offended because he will definitely never be a dictator, and went on to call himself a legitimately elected president.
Щоб довго про це не говорити. Я фокусуюсь на безпеці України сьогодні, а не за 20 років.
Zelensky called for Trump to meet him before any summit with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, while expressing his desire to see his US counterpart as more than a mediator between Ukraine and Russia. When asked about Ukraine giving US access to its mineral deposits, Zelensky said that officials of both the countries are in touch and there has been progress on the deal. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that they expected an agreement would be signed this week. Zelensky said if the minerals deal is signed, US troop deployment in Ukraine would be a logical step as a security guarantee. He also refused to acknowledge that Ukraine owed Washington $500 billion, a figure often cited by Trump as the total wartime aid provided by the US to Kyiv. A support tracker by Germany's Kiel Institute for the World Economy shows the US has so far committed $114 billion in total support to Ukraine. Europe continues its push to strengthen Ukraine, with leaders of France and UK heading to US to convince Trump not to abandon Kyiv in pursuit of a peace deal. This as Russia and US teams plan to meet again this week to discuss improving ties after the war in Ukraine, which had pushed the ties between Washington and Moscow to its worst level since the Cold War. European leaders will hold a special summit on the 6th of March to discuss Ukraine and European defense. As Russia's offensive continues, on Sunday, Ukraine's Air Force Command spokesperson said that record 267 Russian drones were launched in a single coordinated attack on the country. Ukrainian officials said 13 regions were targeted, and while many of the drones were repelled, those that were not caused destruction to the infrastructure, and at least 3 casualties were reported in Ukraine. Meanwhile, thousands rallied in support of Ukraine on the 3rd anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, which began on the 24th of February 2022. The UNGA is all set to vote on a text resolution drafted by Ukraine and the EU on the war today, which says it is urgent to end the war this year and clearly repeat the Assembly's previous demands, which is an immediate cessation of Russian hostilities against Ukraine and also an immediate withdrawal of Russian troops. Reuters reported that the US has declined to co-sponsor the text and proposed its own resolution for a General Assembly vote, which calls for a swift end to the war but makes no reference to its territorial integrity. Late on Friday, the US also gave the same draft resolution to the UNSC and is now pushing for the UNSC to vote before the General Assembly meets. For more on this, our correspondent Anas Malik is now joining us from Kyiv with more on this story. Hi, Anas. You're joining us live from Kiev. Ukraine is entering the 4th year of its all-out war with Russia. First up, what is the sentiment on ground? What are Ukrainians saying, or perhaps feeling about the war, which doesn't seem to come to an end?
Resha, you rightly mentioned today marks 3 years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine as it began on the 24th of February 2022. In 3 years since, we've seen loss of human lives, loss of capital, loss of infrastructure. But if there's no loss, there is no loss of the resistance and resilience by the Ukrainian people. Now, today marks 3 years of the invasion, and they're entering a 4th year. I was here when the invasion began, just days after the invasion began. The street behind me, it used to wear a deserted look. Today, 3 years on, we know that the fact that these traffic jams, they speak volumes for themselves. The fact that how Ukraine has coped up with the grim reality of war. Today, we're expecting 13 world leaders to be here in Ukraine. And in fact, the President of the European Commission, among those who have already arrived, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she's here. President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Estonia, Christian Michal, the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, the President of Lithuania, Gitanas Nausėda, and the President of Latvia have also arrived. In fact, while I'm talking to you, the cavalcade, which probably is going through, are the cavalcades of the Prime Minister of Denmark, Norway, Prime Minister of Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. They have also arrived here in Kyiv. 13 world leaders are scheduled to be here in Kyiv, whereas another 24 will join an online meeting to express solidarity with Ukrainian leadership and the people of Ukraine. Raisha?
Right, Anas, like you listed out the European leaders who are coming to Kiev and those who have already reached, obviously in show of support for Ukraine. But let's also talk about how much has changed in recent weeks, with Zelensky offering a deal on his presidency for NATO membership. How is that being perceived in Kiev, especially with the growing rift between the US and Ukraine?
Well, 3 years of the war, a lot has changed. You've rightly mentioned that. When we were first here in 2022, when Leon was reporting from here in Kyiv, the amount of support that President Zelensky had at that point of time, 3 years on, clearly he does not enjoy that much of support. And we say this having been to the length and breadth of the country. On the first anniversary, we were in Kherson. Yesterday, we were in Donbass. So having spoken to the people there on the ground, it would not be wrong to say that there is a lot of critique on the strategy that has been opted by President Zelensky with regards to this particular war. So the fact that he's offering to step down in return of security guarantees, it is being looked as a political gimmick in order to gain back popularity. Something that is evident, that is writing on the wall, the fact that in case if elections are to be held tomorrow even, President Zelensky might just struggle to get back into power. So that goes on to speak volume themselves. But in the face of that, such an offer being made by President Zelensky that he is ready to step down in return of security guarantees, that is being welcomed by the Ukrainian people at large, because it would not be wrong to say that they are tired. They're tired of this growing aggression. They're tired of these air raid sirens. They're tired of the drones hovering over, and they're tired of the losses that are there almost every other week. So they want an end to the war, but on the condition and with the condition that it should result in some sort of a victory of sorts and not an absolute loss for Ukraine going forward. Rahisha?
Right, Anas, thanks very much for joining us on the show. We'll of course be tracking this very closely with you.